Good morning all. Welcome to the second session of today. We will talk about the Global Compact on Refugees, and we have 4 panel members who I will introduce to you. First I'll introduce myself. My name is Margriet Weenma. I'm the Deputy Chief of Mission of UNHCR here in India. And I'm here with my colleague, Tomoko Fukumura. And Tomoko is our Senior Protection Officer in UNHCR and has been here for the last 2 years in India, but with UNHCR already more than 20 years, so she has a lot of experience to share with you. And then I have, to her left, Dr. Banerjee. He is from the VIT University, and we'll talk about the evolution of Global Compact on Refugees, while Tomoko will focus more on the Global Compact, the Global Refugee Forum that will happen in December. So the 2 presentations are very linked to each other. And then I have to my right Dr. Kanika Sharma, the assistant professor here of this university actually, and she will talk about climate change and the Global Compact on Refugees, how that is interlinked and how it is addressed through the Global Compact on Refugees, but also other instruments. And then we have a 4th panel member. Your name is Anirudhana Chaudhry. Sorry, you were just added just now. You're from the KITS Law School in Odisha. So welcome. Also covering issues related to climate change and refugees. So those 2 presentations will complement each other. I'm sure after those 4 presentations we have time to discuss and have an interesting discussion on these different issues around refugees and displacement. Then I will give the floor to the first presenter, Tomoko. Oh no, Dr. Banerjee, pardon. Dr. Banerjee, who will talk about the evolution of the Global Compact on Refugees. Please go ahead, sir.
Good morning and thank you very much, Honorable Chair. And it is indeed a great pleasure to speak in front of the audience of Indian Society of International Annual Conference. And I always deem it an honor and it's a pleasure to share some of the thoughts on the contemporary issues of international law. As we all know that ISIL provides a platform and a place for debate and discussion on pressing needs and issues of international law. So the one such topic which is prescribed in this particular session is that Global Compact on Refugees. If I recall my memory, when the Global Compact on Refugees was adopted, immediately we had one annual conference. And in that particular meeting, I had an opportunity to share the ideas on the prospects of Global Compact on Refugees and how it is going to be implemented, and what are the strengths and what are the aspirations what we narrated in the Global Compact on Refugees. Now, we are coming closer to the 5 years of this existence of the Global Compact on Refugees. And also we had one Global Refugee Forum in 2019, and now we are working to go to another Global Refugee Forum which is scheduled in the month of December in 2023. So this actually gives us a kind of an idea what were the aspirations envisioned in the Global Compact Refugee when it is designed, and where the communities, international community has taken obligations, rather commitments and pledges aftermath of that particular emergence of the refugee or compact, and now where we are today and what we are looking into, how this particular compact has been delivered anything in the last 5 years. So that's the thing which I want to discuss. And also, I am here basically to talk about 3 important issues. The one such issue is that recently I had an opportunity to be part of the European Academic Refugee Interdisciplinary Network, EARIN, which is organized by the Geneva headquarters, along with the Global North and the Universities of Global South. Particularly Global South, there are 3 universities have been selected for that. That is one, VITAP School of Law, and I was a part of that particular forum. This basically is a kind of run-up activities to the Global Refugee Forum, which is going to be held in 2023 in December. And there is one university from the Tunisia, and one university from the Turkey, and one speaker from Bangladesh. So the 4 universities are primarily represented in that particular discussion. It's a kind of working groups. In that particular working groups, the idea of the working group was to look at it, how to build a bridge or address the gap which is there between the developing countries and the developed world, where we know that the lot of refugees have been hosted by the developing country. I think almost 78 to 80% of the global refugees have been accommodated by the developing countries, and a very limited responsibility has taken by the European and North American countries. In this particular context, when 2019 the Refugee Forum has addressed some of the issues, and that particular issues have been taken as a kind of lead by the UNHCR in Geneva, and they asked one of the university partner of us, that is Utrecht University in the Netherlands, to organize this particular event. In this particular event, they are asking us what are the impediments from the Global South as well as the low and middle economic group countries, particularly with regard to the realization of the obligations as well as the commitments and aspirations which have been highlighted in the Global Compact on Refugees. So this is the background on which I would like to speak. So when they asked me, so what exactly from the perspectives of India and South Asia in general, they asked me, then we told what could be the problems which the states are encountering, and also in order to realize the policies as well as the ideologies which we have in the context of global refugee protection system. Yes, we all know that India is basically hosting number of refugees since its independence. So it is not a new phenomenon, but in recent past, due to whatever the political change and the change of political climate in the South Asia and particularly in India, how the specific global refugee protection system has come to a particular standstill, and what the political will has been changed from 1952 until today. That one aspect which I was trying to discuss with them and highlight. And also the kind of an accessibility to the resources. That is the second issue which I narrated in the context of realization of the goals which we have in the Global Compact Refugees. And apart from that, there are 3 more issues that have been highlighted during that particular meeting, which was held in the April 26th and also June 8th of 2023. It is just a few months ago. Now, my presentation here has focusing. It is very short span of time to look at that the success maybe what we have achieved in the last 5 years after having this Global Compact Refugees. See, though it is a very short span of time, but we need to look at it. If you look at that, the states and other non-state actors have given commitment. If you look at that, the dashboard of the compact on the global refugees and UNHCR, and it says that there are more than 1,600 commitments have been given by the states as well as non-state actors. Now, when they have taken the commitments, how far they have been achieved and have they been realized in translating their commitments into an action. So that's where the gap which I want to focus on that. Now the first thing is that when the Global Compact Refugee came into existence, and the world has witnessed a kind of a dramatical system, that is where the 2 years in the world has been witnessed a pandemic, And the pandemic has got its own challenges to address the problems of general in nature and also particularly in international law and specifically with regard to the refugees are concerned. And that is where we lost almost 2 years for the effective realization of the commitments what we have in the global refugee compact. And the second one is that in the post-COVID era, if you look at it, now suddenly we have the problems of Russia-Ukraine war. And this Russia-Ukraine war has brought another challenge to the refugee protection system and the commitments which have been given. So if you take that as a kind of 2 incidents that happened within the short span of the 5 years of the existence of the global compact and refugees, yes indeed, now in the backdrop of that particular 2 incidents, we need to assess how far we have come. Now if you look at that, it's an evolution process. I don't want to spend much time on that because all of us know very well about what is the background in which this particular global compact of refugees have been adopted and how it is going to work it out. The first part of my presentation, chiefly I wanted to look at it, what are the commitments undertaken by the international community and what are the important factors which led to the adoption of the global compact and refugees. So as you know that we have the flux of the refugees, if you compare in the last 50 years, now it is an all-time high. The 80 millions of populations are either displaced or relocated, and 26 million people have been having crossed the international border, and they have kind of suffering due to lack of support from the states with regard to the determination of the status of the refugees and effectively implementing the protection mechanism. So in this particular background, the compact has been came into picture. So the high-level ministerial meetings which was held before 2015 and 16, which culminated into the New York Declaration and followed by the framework for the refugees. These are the kind of very important milestones in the protection system. They are reaffirming the principles which we have under the Refugee Convention Protocol as well as the human rights mechanisms, that ICCPR as well as the UDHR. If you look into that particular entire framework, it is one of the aspirational document to address effectively for the problems of the refugees across the world. And now here the issue, the main issue is that it's a kind of responsibility sharing. Now how are we going to change the existing patterns of the political will and share the responsibilities with regard to the addressing the problems of the refugees? As I mentioned that the developing countries, they are the one hosting the major chunk of the refugees from across the globe. And now the developing countries do not have the proper economic and financial support and the responsibility sharing from the different stakeholders. That is where the whole system which is coming up into the situation. And also the changing political climate across the world, and where some countries have experienced religious fundamentalism, and also we have the nationalistic governments. When the nationalistic governments are coming, and it is putting a kind of a deep stumbling block in addressing the problems of the refugees and providing the protection mechanism. So that is where now we need to look at it, what exactly the issues. The first issue which I would like to say that, are we creating enabling conditions for the implementation of the global compact on the refugees? So what are the enabling conditions? If you look at that, the most changes which a refugee policy and practices have taken place in the last 5 years, it is always linked to the local solutions. And do we have an effective local solutions apart from that what the global compact has been proposed? Now, if you look at that, that is a kind of potential issues which I mentioned that, the Global Refugee Forum in 2019 which happened, there are 280 pledges were made by the states and international community, particularly relating to the law, that is, and policy making. And they want to insist on that these particular aspects will have to be focusing on the national inclusion policy, legal and policy framework with regard to the adoption of the commitments and the policies which are there under the Global Compact Refugees. Now, how far we have achieved that one is a big question mark. So 2019 we have taken that 280 only in one aspect of the policy and law, which is how far have been realized is a big question. I'll take the two examples. One in these are the one accommodating most of the refugees. Two examples, that is, one is in Colombia, where that Venezuelan refugees and migrants have been coming, and their access with regard to the protection is concerned is one issue which highlighted the kind of blocks as well as the problems with regard to it. That is one example. The second example is that Bangladesh and India with regard to the Rohingya refugees are concerned. If you look at that, when the Rohingya refugees started crossing the international border, going to Bangladesh or coming to India, the kind of situations, the kind of political climate which meted out by this refugee protection mechanism was very difficult to explain. Now, in this particular context only, how far the law and the policy mechanisms were helping to build the kind of address the problems of the refugees. That is the first thing which I wanted to discuss on this particular paper. And the second issue is that is the support of the how implementing this particular GCR and refugee comprehensive refugee and the framework approach which is needed. So it is very important. If you look at that, whatever the despite of the political goodwill, and we are implementing that obligations of the 1951 Convention and 67 Protocol, and whatever, we need to involve the multi-stakeholder engagement with regard to the commitments given for the purpose of engaging humanitarian development partners. So now, the idea here, the GCR is trying to address is that not only the state actors, why we cannot have the non-state actors engagement in it. For example, the OECD as well as the World Bank and other corporate houses also. Why can't we engage them into that kind of situation to have a kind of dialogue with regard to engage coherently through the calibrated dialogue and technical assistance and finding the solutions to the refugee issues. That is the second. And the third one is that it is there are opportunities to apply GCR more broadly, including the creative solution, developing a kind of creative solutions. And what kind of creative solutions we will have to look at it. These creative solutions are not only limited to the giving protection and engaging them with one kind of aspects, but there are more other other events or other aspects we will have to focus on that. The one particular issue was highlighted by the EARIN network, the debates and discussions was, they said that, are we having a kind of framework, particularly with regard to the facilitation of the educational needs of the refugee children. So how far we are addressing that particular problem. So when we highlighted that, and whether the refugee host countries are in a position to address the educational needs of these communities which are coming to their countries while they are addressing the problems of the refugee children. So when we discussed about that particular issue, this is one kind of a creative solution, because at the end of the day we have the durable solutions. But when they are staying in that host country for over a period of time, definitely the children of the refugees are losing their learning abilities and skills and employability. And with regard to that, how far this global compact and refugees can make an intervention with regard to the states and multi-stakeholders and address the problems of the educational needs and health needs of the people. And here another point also has come up. So how far these multi-stakeholders can address other medical and health requirements. So this kind of innovative solutions have to come in the context of that one. Now the fourth point which I would like to further focus on that. Now I mentioned that COVID-19 has played a major role in hampering the refugee response because of the kind of conditions and situations which has prevailed, and here the entire what I mentioned, that the promises made and pledges taken by the various stakeholders has completely come down to an all-time low, and it's gradually declining because of various reasons. And how we are going to increase that and to available for the refugee the population. So that is the fourth issue which we have to. The fifth issue is that what kind of efforts we will have to broaden to base the states engaging, actively engaging the international refugee protection regimes, which have not yielded a specific results in many of the countries. So this is a very pertinent issue. Like as I mentioned, that global compact on refugee may not be in a kind of panacea, because it's not having a kind of legal obligations on the part of the state. It's only a kind of recommendatory and advisory role they are playing. But we have that a tangible treaty mechanisms and international law with regard to that. How far these two are coexisting together to address the problems of that one. So in the context of these, we have some key recommendations which I would like to suggest. That is, we need to look at the first key recommendation is that we need to prioritize more equitable and predictable responsibility sharing. So between the global south and global north, because global south is one of the countries are hosting the majority of the refugees across the country. The donor governments must intensify their political and diplomatic efforts to support the kind of responsibility sharing, and which is one of the major pledge was given to the Global Refugee Forum in 2019. If they are not realizing by end of this year, by when we are going to the 2023 Global Refugee Forum, then it makes a kind of hollow promises, and there is no substantial outcome by having this particular the forum as well as compact. The second key recommendation was, and the donor government should make immediate steps to ensure the responsibility of the refugee beyond the foreign policy and international financing systems. And like donor governments must come up with a kind of a solution and assess the needs of the refugee population, and safeguard the asylum spaces and supporting the third country solutions, because many of these days the third country solutions are not effectively yielding the fruits because various political reasons. So that is why we will have to look at it. And the third and the last one, what I would like to look at it as a priority for the 2023, government should commit to rise their resettlement targets. Every government must have a targets with regard to resettlement and the resolution of the problems are concerned. How they are going to address that, we leave it to the states. The state will have to take it, and UN agencies and civil society must work together to hold the states accountable against further erosion of the resettlement commitments and what they have given. So these are some of the key recommendations which we can come up where there is a huge gap. The promises and pledges were made, and the commitments were taken by the international community, and its realization the last 5 years. So this is the kind of situation where we are living in, and we need to address this particular refugee problem with these tangible recommendations in the days to come, so that by the time when we have the second Global Refugee Forum in 2023 in December, at least we can show a progress report saying that whether the commitments have been realized by all the stakeholders in the context of providing a durable solution to the refugee problem. With this, I'll stop it here. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Banerjee, for this insightful introduction to the GCR and where we are today. When it was signed in 2018, we are 5 years on the road. Very helpful. Tomoko will now give a presentation on the GRF that was already mentioned by Dr. Banerjee. That will take place from the 13th to the 15th of December in Geneva with stakeholders like states and other stakeholders, private partners, NGOs, refugee communities will be represented. So Tomoko will go into more detail about this particular event and how it is linked to the objective of GCR and our efforts. to move forward. Thank you for that.
Thank you very much, Margaret, for the introduction, and also that the Dr. Benarji Chaka, thank you very much for the very, very interesting your study, presenting your study on the GCL. Again, that I wanted to thank this opportunity to be able to be here from UNESHA. That as I introduced, I'm a senior protection officer working for UNESHA now in India, nearly 2 years. But I have been working for UNESHA for 20 years in a variety of countries, like in Asia, close to, for example, Afghanistan, Iran. I've also worked in South Sudan, Eritrea, East Horn of Africa, also including Geneva. So that is really a privilege for me to be able to work in India here now. And then just to again thank for the Indian Society of International Law, that the UNESHA and the ISIL has quite long-standing cooperation as well. That we also work together. We actually do a session for the refugee law for the ISIL for the academic year. So that we have been having quite long-standing cooperations, and then again that we also here want to emphasize the appreciation for the ISIL to having UNESHA and continue our good cooperation and strengthening our cooperation. And again, congratulations for this 51 the annual conference for your organization. So so although that Dr. Benarji already talked about detail about the global compact on the refugee, maybe just to touch base on the background of it, that you may be fully aware, but just to give a context on that, that we now live in a situation where that the over 100 million of people are displaced. Among that, the 35 million are the refugees who cross the international border, and in addition to the asylum seeker, it's over 40 million in the world by the end of the year 2022 are living as a refugee. And that basically is that we are now living in the current world, current reality. And then it is actually the international community really recognized that the larger framework of the refugee protection will be needed to tackle this the reality of the refugee and asylum seeker in the world. And then also one of the trigger was also that it is actually the SALT developed over the year, but also the most recent that you may recall the trigger was also that the European refugee crisis back in 2014 and 2015, that the many huge number of the Syrian refugees and Afghan refugees basically crossed the Mediterranean to reach to the Europe. So that was a huge movement, population movement, and then it was also that actually that made again the international community do recognize that we need a larger framework. We need a larger framework, bigger cooperation, not only the refugee hosting country, but the global community do need to look at the current displacement. So that was actually how it get developed. So that after this European refugee crisis, there was a New York Declaration adopted by the General Assembly in September 2016. So that you can see the time frame how it developed after this huge refugee crisis have been continuing in the Asia as well, but also the Syrian crisis happened that after 2010, and then all the Iraqi crisis, and then people started to cross the sea into Europe. That happened 2014 and 2015, and hence that led to the New York Declaration in September 2016. That the UN and then member states basically committed that we have to work on the larger framework. That basically lead to the adoption of the Global Compact on Refugee that was affirmed by the UN General Assembly 2 years after. 2 years after the New York Declaration, because we needed the time to work on it. So that was December 18, 2000, that we adopted the Global Compact on Refugee. So that as already the Dr. Chaka mentioned talked about the objective. The Global Compact of the Refugee has 4 key objectives that you see on the screen. That is one, that is the pressure on a host country. As we talked that there are currently 35 million, including asylum seeker, 40 million refugees and asylum seeker exist in the world. And then actually that more than 3/4 of those people are hosted only in 20 countries. So that is actually the reality, that there is a huge imbalance made. So this is actually one of the reasons that why we said is the pressure on the host country where the refugees are hosted. Second is the enhanced refugee self-reliance. It is refugees that we shouldn't see them as rather than negative. They are actually with the people of the strong resilience and then the power through the experience that they gain. That they actually are very strong people that who are able to, contribute to the society of the displaced or the country of origin in the future or wherever they go. So for that purpose, we also think it is very important to have the refugee enhanced to be able to self-reliance. Third objective is to expand the third country solution. As also Dr. said, this third country solution, there's a variety of third country solutions. Third country solution is someone, for example, that the refugees who are hosted in Jordan, for example, that have the opportunity to move to the other countries such as US, Australia, Canada. That basically those countries commit to take those refugees from the first country asylum and then they give the residency. Basically, they open up quite a lot of possibility for them. One way to do is the resettlement. That is the UNHCR work closely with the government of the recipient government, such as US and Canada and Australia. That is one set course of the third country solution, but also there's many ways that the country actually can commit. For example, that they issue the different humanitarian visa or the family unification, so that the many refugees do able to join their family in Australia or US or Canada, or of course some European country, but also that to move in the purpose of their job or the education. So there's a many way of the refugee to be able to move to other country to actually pursue and strengthen their capacity. The fourth objective is the support for the in the country of origin to support the condition in the country of origin for prepare for the future return of the refugee in a manner of safety and dignity. So that means that we do need that investment for the huge to the country that is producing a huge number of displacement. That can be, of course, Afghanistan, that can be Bangladesh, that can be Myanmar, that can be, in a region like that, but also many other, of course, the country, in the African country, and of course, the Middle Eastern country, Syria, and then Iraq, etc. So that so this is basically the objective of the Global Compact of the Refugees. And then also the Global Compact of the Refugees this year also set out the series of arrangements to facilitate and achieve those of those 4 objectives. And then key arrangement of those, one of the key among those arrangements is actually the global refugee forum that we're going to talk today. I'm talking today about the Global Refugee Forum. So maybe then quickly that you look at what is the purpose of the Global Refugee Forum. As we said, that it is actually the aim is to advance the objective of the GCR. The Global Refugee Forum aim so this is really that the Global Refugee Forum is really the integral part of the GCR. So that the GRF, I'll use abbreviation that the GRF, the Global Refugee Forum, GRF, is aiming to advance the objective, as I said, of the global objective of the GCR. And then GRF is expected to facilitate the announcement of pledges and then contribution, and then consider opportunities and challenges, and then how to promote the responsibility sharing. So that you see the three keywords: the pledging, stock taking, and the learning. This is actually like the keywords for the when we consider the GRF. And then how do we do it? It is also to do it with the multi-stakeholder partnership approach for the meaningful refugee participation. So it is not a forum, just a state commit. It is not at all. From the beginning, it was envisaged that all the other partner will be part of. It can be other international actor, it can be a private actor, it can be the academic. So that from the beginning, that the multi-stakeholder participation was envisaged. But this is something that the doctor also stated in his presentation that can be further strengthened. So let's just quickly look at what has been achieved from the GRF. So that the GRF, the first one was that took place in 2019. And it is agreed that it will take every 4 years. So that the last one took 2019, so that it's precisely why that it's now taking place in December 2024, as it should be happening every 4 years. So that what happened at the GRF 2019? So that the 1,685 presidents announced, and then 1,000 presidents received progress update, and then 25% of the reported presidents are now fulfilled. And then 323 new pledges are made since GRF 2019. And then I will talk about it more, but there is we have also the mechanism called the GCR indicator framework to track the progress of the pledges that we make. Yes, and then yes. So maybe we move to the so that there are actually two important mechanisms to bridge the 4 years between the GRF. One happened in 2019 and now happening to 2023. So there is two important key initiatives. One is actually the GCR indicator report that UNHCR issued in 2021. And then also that we also conducted the so-called high-level official meeting. Those are the two mechanisms to take stock of the progress towards the GCR objective, and then at the midpoint, because we did it in 2021, so that in between the 4 years, after 2 years, that we did this the indicator report and then high-level meeting. So this is to take the stock where we are at the mid stage of the GRF before reaching to the 2023 this year's GRF. So just a few examples that the GCR indicator is interesting that you'll be able to share the website where you can actually reach to the UNHCR site of the GCR and GRF. And then you can also easily find the link to the GCR indicator report that actually shows quite a lot of data. So this is quite interesting also that maybe after this today's session, if you could go and look at that, so that that would give more quite the examples, so that easier to kind of understand where we are and what kind of issue are discussed. So anyway, that the judiciary indicator report in 2021 reported that there was an increase of the overseas development assistance by the donor states for the humanitarian support, but they actually also pointed out that it didn't increase much of the development assistance. Just to say, this is a key issue that we actually think that the humanitarian support is of course important to respond to the humanitarian crisis happening for the refugee crisis. Yet that the humanitarian response can be just short in a way that the short response really to make the life-saving assistance. Yet that to really move from this crisis, what we need is the linkage with the development assistance. That humanitarian assistance itself cannot solve the refugee crisis. So with the perspective that we actually say that development assistance is very important and the key to solve this, overall the global refugee crisis. So that what that the judiciary indicator report pointed out was that there was an increase for the humanitarian assistance support, but the development wasn't as much as we actually wishes to have. And then they also observed a stronger policy to include refugees in national system, which we really appreciate and promote and really appreciate. That means basically the refugee are, for example, this example is like the refugee are included for their national assistance policy, for example, the health or education, those kind of national the system that the refugee are included. So that this is actually we actually see the very strong progress on the stronger policy to include the refugee for the hosting stays national system. We actually call it inclusion. We say that we facilitate the inclusion. We say that the inclusion is another form of protection of the refugee, so that we actually see this is quite a great progress. Yet what we actually find was that it wasn't the great support to implement it. So that was a little bit of gap on that. And another point that we find was there are more solutions. Which I mentioned, the resettlement complementary pathway that we say other form of a third country solution, such as a job or education or other migration form, or that the voluntary return to the country of origin. That the more solutions since 2016 that we observed than the previous 5 years of the 2016. Yet that it is again the little downward trend after that. So that is actually the finding of the judicial indicators. I just wanted to also mention some of another key, the middle point important initiative, which is a high-level official meeting that also took place in 2021. So they actually made 20 important key recommendations, and they suggested for the come up with a clear follow-up action to be followed to reach to the next year of this year 2022. So it is a little bit of detail, but that actually include, like for example, that the first one is implement current GRF pledges, and or the second is enhance access to the international protection. That is kind of a big one. But also that the five and also related to this, the presentation to follow, the build attention to climate change in how we do, how we work, and then also that the facilitate more systematic, inclusive, meaningful refugee participation. The refugee participation is a key. So that there's eight cross-cutting recommendation made on the blue one that you could maybe see, and then objective specific recommendation was made under the objective 1, objective 2, objective 3, objective 4. So that was the role of the high high-level officials meeting, which took place in 2021. So that now, what then, after this, that we have this process of the establishment of the GLF, and starting the GLF in 2019, having the media session, midterm session, stock taking with the judicial indicators, and then a high-level meeting, and then now we are coming to the GLF 2023. So that what we aim at is really to build to really build the opportunity to build on and highlight the progress made for the past years by the government and other stakeholders, and then also that toward the implementation of the pledges, and then also that we are to look at in how, of course, how we'll be able to do that. That is built on achievement and address gaps to strengthen the comprehensive response based on national ownership complemented by multi-stakeholder and a partnership approach. So that is actually how we are trying to achieve. For your information, that this year's GLF takes place in Geneva, Switzerland, basically hosted by the Switzerland government, the state of Switzerland, and then co-convened by the few countries. This year, the country they actually volunteer from the some key region. Example, that this time the GLF convener from South America, one from Colombia, from Asia, actually Japan, from my country, by the way, that I'm from Japan. I'm actually privileged to think about it. I'm happy to know that Japan actually committed to convene. And then also Jordan from the Middle East, and then also Uganda, for example, from Africa. So those are key regional areas that the one state actually co-convened this GLF in December 2000 this year. So that how to then advancing the arrangement for burden and the responsibility sharing. That how do we actually want to make sure that it happens? There's some, again, the few keywords, a few notions came up. So that is actually to have the, for example, the form of a support platform. So this is something like not one country, but for one, for example, the refugee situation, for example, the Syrian situation, or the Afghan situation, to have like a multi-country support platform. That is actually the idea. And then also that secondly, as also the doctor also said in his presentation, the regional and the national arrangement is quite important to actually have this approach, not just one, but also the region. And then also another key issue that we are looking at is the GLF 2023 and looking at is that the financing arrangement and the tracking. And then also that to really emphasize that the promote the development cooperation. And then another one is also that the data system. We also see that from our experience that it is very much important to have a clear data, clear tracking down system so that we'll be able to see where we are. So this is also one of the efforts. And then another thing that how we actually looking at GCR, how can we actually work in the emergency situation? So just to look at another issue, that implementing current pledges and developing new ones. There was also the discussion through the course of the year that how we can improve the pledges. Of course, the pledges that the individual pledges are very much welcome, still welcome, but we also added some concept that maybe that it's good to have the high quality pledges, multi-stakeholder pledges to be made. Yes. So that maybe just to look at for the pledging, how we actually see the pledges can be improved or do have another form of the pledges. So that the high quality pledges here, we actually see that is to be, that align with the, well, it is a big number, but 20 key recommendation from the, is aligned with the recommendation which was made by the high-level official meeting in 2021. And then also that it should be, of course, the need-driven, additional quantifiable need-driven. And the third point was that it should be, again, make sure it is a multi-stakeholder, it should be jointly, this project should be jointly developed. That would, of course, that make a differences of the achievement. It was actually formed jointly with the stakeholder. So, and then also that to very much in a way to support that inclusive policy. And then the fourth one is in the it should be developed in a consultation with the refugee, with the consideration of Asian gender diversity. That means basically all the refugee, not only the male or adult refugee, but the children to the elders, female, the men, they all to be included for the consultation. This is, we actually see it is actually the important step for the successful pledges to be made. I wouldn't actually go too much. I think I'm conscious about the time. I think it is quite where I have been speaking too much. But just to say that this is one key issue is a multi-stakeholder engagement, which was also highlighted by the Dr. Benani in his own presentation. Just to quickly look at that we actually have a GCR initiative or group of friends community. So that this is actually that what they do is that they are focused on French implementation, matching, and cultivation. And also they also report on the progress and make calls to action at informal briefing in 2023, 2022 and 3. This is a process that we have been doing. And also this group also prioritizes impactful pledges initiative for engagement in GRF ecosystem of events. And then there's a second group, we say. There's an NGO reference group. They are comprised of the 15 regional and global NGO network. And they actually was just launched last year, 2022, as a GRF consultative mechanism, and then to develop the joint pledge. And then third, of course, key stakeholder, the refugee engagement. The consultation with internal advisory board of displaced and stateless people, that we actually making sure that we actually do consult and discuss with the person who are actually a refugee or asylum seeker. And then also the call for the refugee expert to engage in the GRS throughout 2023 that we have been doing. And then also, we are doing it also in the refugee representation in the regional NGO consultation that we are making sure. This is just, I'm not going to go through again, but this is just to show that how the process has been for the past 2 years since the midterm stock taking of the GRF report and a high-level meeting that took place in 2021. And then also that this year that it is coming. We have actually done the preparatory meeting in February and May, and it just taken place in September now in Geneva. And then also that we have been doing the informal briefing on the actors, and also we are working on the GCR, second GCR indicator report to be issued in December alongside with the GRF. And the GRF is planned as set in December, starting from 12th of December, and then the key session are 13 to 15 of December. So that just to say that this is the site that you will be easily find in when you actually just find the UNHCR Global Refugee Forum. You will reach to this site, and it is with a proper proper information, but also that the interesting and very successful pledges and the commitment and achievement they have been made through this GCR and GRF process. Just to say that it is a huge, actually, that the investment and the commitment and then achievement really made by the legal community network, globally there's a lot of legal specialists like you really to comment how they be able to contribute to this journey. And then one of them is also in Asia, we have a legal network that provides, for example, the pro bono legal support for the refugee, or also to conduct the research related to the refugee matter. So there's a huge commitment made by the legal practitioner and then the specialist. I just wanted to highlight that, so that there's quite the variety of the way that the GRF is not just a state matter, not at all. And then actually that each practitioner really can look at how we be able to see the refugee situation and then provide some solution or improve their situation. So thank you very much for your time, and I'm really pleased again for this opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Tomoko, for this very clear overview of what actually the Global Refugee Forum is about and how we engage a range of different stakeholders in this process to move forward on the global context of refugees, as Dr. Banerjee was talking about. So we will move on actually now to a specific topic around the GCR, which is about climate change and how that impacts also displacement. We will start with the first. We have two presenters on that. We start with Dr. Kanika Sharma from the ISIL. Please go ahead, and then we have a second one also on the same topic.
Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon to all present here. I have chosen the topic climate change disasters basically, and I tried to relate it with the GCR, where Global Compact on Refugees, it points out the displacements due to the impact of the climate change. I have pointed out some of the paragraphs which have been explicitly mentioned there, and I tried to infer from the Global Compact on Refugees that how climate change disasters, they basically result in the cross-border movements. I'm using the term climate refugees, though UNHCR and other organizations, they do not recognize as such this terminology, climate refugees, and different terms they have been used to define this category and to deal with the plight of this category of the displaced people. So the focus of my presentation will be on climate-induced displacements with reference to the cross-border movements due to the impact of climate change first, then issues related to the definition of the climate refugees, and how far international instruments, including Global Compact on Refugees, is addressing climate disaster displacements. So we all know that climate change and the human mobility is interrelated, and the greatest single impact of the climate change is on the human mobility. Nowadays, with millions of people displaced by environmental degradation. Evidences from the past and current findings, they reveal that climate change is a major driver of population displacement both internally and externally. World Bank's report of 2018, Groundswell report on preparing for internal migration part 1 of 2018, it mentioned that 143 million internal migrants will be there by 2050 in 3 densely populated regions in the world, namely Sub-Saharan Africa, South Asia and Latin America. And further, after 3 years, another report published by the World Bank in the year 2021, it mentioned that this number will be increased to 216 million people to move, adding 6 regions, that is East Asia and the Pacific, North Africa, Eastern Europe and Central Asia, and the displacements will be internal in these regions. And the data as collected by UNHCR in the year 2022, it mentioned that year 2022, it hits all-time high global forced displacements, witnessing 108.4 million displacements during the period, of which 35.3 million were refugees and 71.1 were internally displaced, of which 62.5 million were displaced as a result of conflict, human rights violations and other similar situations, and 8.7 million were displaced as a result of disasters. This figure is mentioned by IDMC, that is Internal Displacement Monitoring Center. So from here we can see that how this number of displaced persons are increasing yearly. So as I mentioned that due to the impacts of the climate change, both people they are displacing internally and externally, and those who are displacing internally, they are the IDPs, and they are very much, I can say that for internally displaced persons, there is also no international legal instrument that exists. But however, these are dealt with the 1998 guiding principles on internal displacements, and we have one regional instrument also, that is the Kampala Convention, that deals with the protection of internally displaced persons. But universally we don't have any international legal instrument for the protection of IDPs. And so far as these movements across the international borders due to the impacts of climate change is concerned, as I said that UNHCR and other organizations, they are not considering these climate refugees as refugees because of the limitations, because of the restrictions, or I can say because of the elements that are mentioned under the 1951 Refugee Convention. Because they do not satisfy, they do not belong to any of the elements that are mentioned in the 1951 Convention, putting restriction on the definition of the climate refugees. Even the courts, they are hesitant to define climate refugees within the 1951 Refugee Convention, and with regard to terminology also, because sometimes the terminology used is climate refugees. Some countries like Poland indicated that the term climate change migrants. Switzerland preferred to use the term environmentally induced migration and displacement. USA used the term climate change related migration. So no one is willing to use the climate refugees. That is because of the restrictions under the 1951 Refugee Convention and the protocol. So further, the Nansen Initiative on disaster-induced cross-border displacement in its protection agenda use the term cross-border disaster displaced persons and also define them. Further, International Law Commission in its 59th session for the first time decided to include the topic titled Protection of Persons in the Event of Disasters, and on the basis of successive reports, it adopted draft articles on the protection of persons in the event of disasters, wherein term disaster was defined. But again, the category that who are to be included within this are the these internally displaced persons or cross-border movements. It's not mentioned there, only disaster word is defined. So far as the protection of climate refugees under 1951 Refugee Convention is concerned, we all know that the elements that are mentioned in the convention, they are like the person must establish well-founded fear of persecution, religion, nationality, membership of particular social group or political opinion. Secondly, person must be outside his country, and thirdly, the person is unwilling to return to his habitual residence, thus clearly excluding climate-induced displacements out of the context of international refugee regime. Moreover, over the time, as I mentioned earlier, that refugee status claim under the Refugee Convention, it was also rejected by the courts. In one of the cases in Canada versus Watt, the Supreme Court of Canada expressly mentioned that international refugee law was meant to serve as substitute for national protection, where the latter was not provided. For this reason, the international role was qualified by built-in limitations. These restrictive mechanisms reflect the fact that international community did not intend to offer a heaven to all the sufferings and individuals, thereby limiting the climate refugees to be protected under the international refugee regime. In another case, the Australian High Court, while considering the 5th para of the preamble of 1951 Refugee Convention, recognizes that it implores all states to recognize social and humanitarian nature of the refugee problem and do everything within the power. No matter how devastating may be epidemic, natural disaster or famine, a person fleeing them is not a refugee within the term of convention. In another case of Tuvalu Island, the appellants who were fleeing due to the climate change claimed the refugee status, which was again rejected by the Immigration and Protection Tribunal of New Zealand. The tribunal held that the appellants fleeing from the climate change impacts in Tuvalu such as coastal erosion, flooding and inundation, water stress, destruction to primary sources of subsistence and damage to individual and community assets. They were not refugees within the meaning of a refugee convention. Further stated, whatever harm they faced in Tuvalu due to anticipated adverse effects of the climate change, it did not arise by the reason of race, religion, nationality, membership of a particular social group or political opinion, thereby again limiting the scope of 1951 Refugee Convention. Then in another case where the Human Rights Committee in 2018 gave the decision somewhere in favor of the climate refugees or the people who are affected by the impacts of the climate disaster in the Ion Toyota case from Kiribati, which is an island in the South Pacific and is at the verge of submerging. And the people there, they are in danger of losing their lands due to rising sea levels. But again, the New Zealand government's decision stated that Toyota was not facing an imminent threat to his life. It acknowledged the effects of climate change, such as rising of sea level. The tribunal said that there are the reasons of accepting that sea level is rising there, and the region or the island may be at the verge of submerging, but there is no imminent threat to the life of the apiline. So the claim was rejected. Claim was rejected by the tribunal, and the Human Rights Committee also rejected the claim of Ion Toyota, thereby repatriating him back to the island. But through this decision, the Human Rights Committee it opened basically the door to the climate change related refugee claims, that if in future the individual or the group of individuals, they have imminent threat to their life because of the adverse effect of the climate change, they may be considered as other refugees. But it's not clearly mentioned there. We can infer from the statement of the Human Rights Committee that it may consider them as refugees in future if there is any imminent threat to their life. Even the climate change law, I must say, the UNFCCC reports, IPCC reports, no doubt they showed concern with regarding to the increasing trend in the displacements due to the adverse impact of the climate change. But direct mention to the cross-border movements is not there in any of the conference of parties. In conference COP16, the Cancun adaptation framework was adopted to enhance an adaptation by undertaking measures to enhance understanding, coordination and cooperation with regard to the climate change induced displacements. COP19, it provides for the establishment of Warsaw International Mechanism for Loss and Damage, that if any region, any country, any island, if it suffers the loss and damage because of the adverse impact of the climate change and the people are suffering from this, there is an establishment of loss and damage fund, there is an establishment of green climate fund for the betterment of the affected population. But I do not know how far this green climate fund and loss and damage fund it provides protection or help to the affected population, because all the countries that are all the regions that are affected by these climate change impacts, they are basically developing and islands basically. Which are at the verge of submerging, and the climate change is the result of the activities of all the developed nations. So how far developed nations they are going to contribute in this loss and damage fund, how to identify the affected population, how to identify the loss is a major task for the climate change activists. And then a few leaders in the recent last year COP27, few leaders of the countries, they made emphasis on the climate refugees in their statements in COP27 that held in Sharm el-Sheikh, Egypt. And they even warned of 1 billion climate refugees around the world by the middle of the century if the governments fail to tackle the climate crisis. Now, this was a position with regard to the climate refugees definition, I must say, or the terminology under different like decisions of the courts or the 1951 Refugee Convention, protocol or the regional instruments. Now, how far the Global Compact on Refugees has addressed climate change or climate-induced displacement in GCR? I would like to start with amid this New York Declaration for Refugees and Migrants of 2016. It endorsed number of pledges related to the needs and the human rights of refugees and migrants, meant to strengthen the protection for these populations. The New York Declaration recognizes climate change, natural disasters, and other environmental factors as drivers of migration and commits to addressing drivers of mass movements. In addition, UN Secretary General's report of 2016 in Safety and Dignity, addressing large movement of refugees and migrants, they explicitly acknowledge the challenges posed by the climate change and disaster displacement. So this New York Declaration and the UN General Secretary reports in Safety and Dignity, no doubt it also mentions about the large movements of refugees and migrants due to the impact of climate change, but again I must say that willingness to include this category of persons specifically is not there in any of the instruments. There must be some political constraints or the constraints by the nations to take up the burden of one more class of one more category of the refugees. But I can say that all these humanitarian instruments or human rights instruments or refugee instruments, they always ask for the burden sharing and responsibility. So burden sharing is one concept that by taking these refugees to the host countries, burden will increase, but I can add here that instead of considering them as the burden for the host countries, use their skills and their powers for the betterment of, for the welfare of the host countries by involving these refugees, be it the conflict refugees or the climate refugees, use them for your own betterment. Now, so far as the Global Compact on Refugees is concerned, it was adopted with 4 key objectives, namely easing pressure on host countries, enhancing refugee self-reliance, expanding access to third country solutions, and supporting conditions in countries of origin for safety and dignity. This GCR is aimed at facilitating more predictable and equitable responsibility sharing, recognizing that a sustainable solution to refugee situations cannot be achieved without international cooperation. That means the international cooperation is required both for all the categories of the refugees, not only the climate refugees, but all the categories of refugees and internally displaced persons. No doubt IDPs the national authorities are under the obligation to deal with internally displaced persons, but in that also the support from the international community is required. That is, an institutional framework is required to protect these displaced persons. Then GCR further provides for a blueprint for the governments, international organizations and other stakeholders to ensure that the host communities receive the support that they need and that refugees can lead productive life. And regarding the disaster displacement specifically, GCR, I must say to some extent, GCR has effectively acknowledges and addresses the reality of increasing displacements in the context of disasters in some of the paragraphs. I would like to mention those paragraphs here. The very first is para 8 of Global Compact on Refugees that mentions the persistence of large-scale refugee movements and protracted refugee situations around the world. That means GCR admits that there are large-scale movements because of the climate change, and it further provides in that para that while not in themselves causes of refugee movements, climate, environmental degradation and natural disasters they are increasingly interact with the drivers of refugee movements. That means the GCR somewhere it admits that these environmental degradation, these climate change, they are the major drivers of the movements internally and across the borders. No doubt it's not explicitly mentioned here across the borders, but I have tried to take an inference from one of the footnote of the GCR that is there in the Global Compact on the Refugees and try to relate it with the cross-border movements. I'll just mention it. As I mentioned that GCR has mentioned in para 8 the words increasingly interact. That clearly indicates the mounting nature of the challenge the world community is facing due to the impacts of the climate change. It further calls in para 9 on the international community to reduce the risk of disaster and promote the inclusion of disaster risk reduction in their planning, and also include refugees to their efforts to reduce the disaster risk. Further, in paragraph 12 of GCR, it recognizes that external forced migration may result from sudden onset natural disasters and environmental degradation. That means, again, GCR has mentioned external forced displacements due to the impact of the climate change here. It says, while the CRRF, that is Comprehensive Refugee Response Framework, relates specifically to large refugee situations, population movements are not necessarily homogeneous and may be of composite character. Some may be large movements involving both refugees and others on the move. Other situations may involve refugees and internally displaced persons. And in certain situations, forced displacement may result from sudden onset natural disasters and environmental degradation. Again, GCR in these lines also again mentioned on external forced migration due to the sudden onset of natural disaster. So I was talking about the footnote that has been mentioned in the GCR. It is basically the Executive Committee conclusion number 103, that is on conclusion on the provision of international protection, including through complementary forms of protection, wherein GCR mentioned that if it is not possible to provide protection to the refugees, to the class of refugees as a whole, try to give them first a temporary protection, and then if it is not possible to include the terminology within the 1951 Convention refugees, then at least provide them the protection. That means it provides for the protection to all, including the climate refugees. I'll just read that conclusion of Executive Committee. It provides and encourages the use of complementary forms of protection for individuals in need of protection who do not meet refugee definition under 1951 Refugee Convention or its 1967 protocol. Mentioning of this Executive Committee conclusion in the GCR, we can infer. I do not know if it is right to say. I will say that we may infer from that GCR also provides for the protection of the climate refugees by mentioning this this Executive Committee conclusion 103 in the GCR. So para 63 further, it provides for the protection and assistance of the stakeholders with mandates and expertise to provide guidance and support to address this humanitarian challenge. So overall, there is no direct mention of climate refugees, but somewhere protection to this category of, we can use a term, the movements across the international borders due to the impact of climate change, if not climate refugees directly, so that it cannot be straightway included in the 1951 Refugee Convention, and so that don't give impression to the signatory countries to the convention that one more burden will come to the host countries if such category is also included in the 1951 Refugee Convention. So in addition to this, Global Compact for Safe, Orderly, Regular Migration also mentioned about the increasing trend of the movements because of the sudden onset and slow onset natural disasters, and it provides for provides to take into consideration the relevant recommendations from the agenda for the protection of cross-border displacement in the context of disasters and climate change, and the platform on disaster displacement. So to conclude, I would like to say that climate change is compounding other drivers of displacement. It's not only climate change that is affecting the population. Conflict, climate change, food insecurity, they are all interrelated, because population which is displaced due to the conflict reasons, their settlements, they are established mostly in the climate zones, that are the climate risk zones. They are established maybe near the islands, near the rivers, on such areas where they are prone to again displaced. So their displacement will result into the double displacement. So conflict, climate change, they are interrelated, and with that food insecurity also because of the drought in some of the regions. So concluding this, I would like to recommend or suggest, I must say, that if it's not possible to consider them to include in 1951 Refugee Convention, at least the countries, the nations, they should come up with national legislations and at least provide them humanitarian visas to the affected persons. And I will mention here the recent United Nations General Assembly resolution that was adopted in 77th session, requesting for the advisory opinion of the International Court of Justice on obligations of states with respect to the climate change. This resolution acknowledges that climate change is an unprecedented challenge of civilizational proportions, and that the well-being of present and future generations of humankind, they depend on our immediate and urgent response to it. This resolution and upcoming advisory opinion of ICJ on climate change, it can be or may be seen as a ray of hope for those affected by the climate change, that maybe International Court of Justice, it mentions about somewhat about these climate change refugees also, or in general the movements across the international borders. And I will request UNHCR also, because they are going for this Global Refugee Forum in December this year, to at least, if not recognize them as climate refugees, at least consider the plight of the people who are displacing across the international borders. At least place this issue with the Global Refugee Forum. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for this very insightful presentation, and I can confirm, obviously, climate action is part of GRF and has a big part of our discussions in December, and there are also already multi-stakeholder pledges in relation to climate action and how to improve the situation. So that is definitely not ignored, I can confirm that. Then we have our last speaker. I'm looking at the time, it's 1:10. So let's also try to keep 10 minutes for some questions. Yeah, thank you so much. And this is on the same subject as climate change.
Good afternoon, all of you. There is a very paradoxical saying that metaphors don't often speak for themselves as they are heavily bred. Now, what is a metaphor? A metaphor is a thought or a thought process which cannot speak for itself. The audience might ask me here, why are we talking about this concept? We are talking about this concept because here we are talking about an issue which is a challenge to the entire humanity, but unfortunately there has been no substantiated answers, and that issue is climate refugees. If I would be allowed, my topic would be climate refugees, the questions answered or the answers questioned. Now, already a lot of speakers have spoken about what is climate refugee, what it is all about. My agenda was specifically this, to speak about how it goes, but with certain practical examples. Imagine this on two spheres. African migrants trying to flee from the coast of Libya, Egypt or Tunisia, from countries today like a Chad, a Niger, an Ethiopia or an Eritrea. What is the closest point of contact? An Italian island in the Mediterranean called the Lampedusa. Now a lot of you might say, oh, they are refugees, but perhaps none of us are aware that not all of them are refugees. Many of them are also climate-induced refugees. Our present position of desertification and drought in southern Ethiopia and Eritrea has led thousands of people to flee away their homes. We might not know exactly of the refugees are trying to go to Europe for a better future. How many of them were actually climate refugees? On the other hand, picture this. There is a beautiful town in my home state Odisha called Duburi. Duburi is in Jajpur. Now that is also the world's largest chromite ore production center owned by Tata. I frequently go there. The problem being that this area is so polluted that breathing has become here a problem. Thousands of people have migrated to cities, or as my panelists might pointed out, are environmental refugees, are IDPs. Are they really? is a concern for our national legislation. If you speak to the people in their local area, their only concern is how do we live in an area where forget about breathing, taking a whiff of fresh air is also difficult. So, are we trying to pull out the Pandora's box? Are we trying to address the bigger question here? Are we trying to address who are environmental refugees? Do they have an international paradigm? Do they have a domestic connotation? Now, there is a very huge global phenomenon now called climate refugees. In fact, Antonio Guterres, the present UN Secretary General, has also stated that this would become a big issue. In 2015, the White House had also called for substantiated measures in order to tackle climate change. But have those actions been taken? At a minuscule level, perhaps yes, but at a major concentrated level, when we speak about a codified international environmental law regime, perhaps, my words are perhaps, the answer is no. Now, what are environmental refugees? But before going that, we must know that there is a substantial definition of refugee under the 1951 Convention. Of course, there have been certain other concentrated definition which speaks about environmental refugees. But again, that is subject to interpretation. Now, what are the causal connection? As ma'am has already pointed out, climate change, rise of sea levels, and a host of other issues. If I can give you one particular example, is a beautiful island called Maldives, which might go under the sea in the next 50 to 60 years. I would like to also point out to a very recent example of the devastating floods in Pakistan last year, which drove away thousands of people from their homelands. They were internally displaced. A lot of these people also wanted to flee away to Iran. Why? The issue was their homelands, their farmlands had become completely unsuitable. At that point of time, the international regime and the Pakistani administration was in a fix. How do we address this issue? On the other hand, we have classical examples of islands like a Tonga, a Tuvalu, a Kiribati, a Nauru, a Micronesia, or a French Polynesia. All these islands in the South Pacific which are in the danger of sinking because of the rising sea levels. I am here reminded of a point why global warming is a big concern and why the world needs to address it. It's of course a bit off topic. There is a point in the southern Pacific Ocean known as Point Nemo where a lot of space debris is put. It is of course farthest away from human habitation. Now, a classical question which arises in my mind is, how much have we destroyed our Mother Earth that for putting down space debris, we need a specific point which is so farther away from the nearest habitation? And what have we done to the southern Pacific? These group of islands, or if you can speak about the nuclear explosions which France and the US undertook in the 1950s and the 1970s, all of this are now slowly contributing towards a chain or a phenomenon where people are bound to leave away their homes, either as a climate refugee or environmental law refugee. Now, what are the impact? What are the projections? You can see on the screen, there are short-term implications, there are also long-term projections. Of course, these are all subject to again data interpretation. If you look at the data of Bierman and Boss for 2010, there might be 200 to 250 million climate refugees by 2050. If I can put it, with the changing dynamics of international relations and politics in Asia, Africa and Latin America, you can see that numbers will spike on. If you look at other statistics and figures, most climate refugees are coming from Africa and Asia. Does this mean that it is a problem of the global south? Perhaps no. Yes, a statistic says that a lot of refugees are emanating from the global south, trying to go to the global north for a better living. Now, what are the reasons? Yes, one of the reasons is climate change, global warming and rising sea levels. I do not say that the list is endless, but yes, these statistics points out towards this fact. Now, are climate refugees protected under international law? The answer is straight away, unfortunately no. Because there has not been a proper definition or a codification process to talk about climate refugees. Ma'am had spoken about a classical case of Taitola versus climate change. It happened in Kiribati. Now this person wanted protection in New Zealand, was not afforded because of the fact that climate change as a concept is not spoken under international. This was the pick of this family who wanted to go away to New Zealand. Of course, a lot of these cases are coming up from South Pacific islands. There is a classical island called Nauru. In Nauru, because of indiscriminate phosphate mining, not only has the environment been degraded to such a level where the islands are slowly sinking, but a lot of people are migrating to Australia or New Zealand, maybe not directly because of climate change, but one of the reasons is climate-induced changes. Now, is there a solution? Of course, there are certain solutions. In the constraints of time, it is difficult to go individually into every solution, but one is, can we expand the Refugee Convention? That would be unleashing the Pandora's box. If today we have to expand the Refugee Convention, what will be a globally accepted definition of climate change or a climate refugees? Can there be a new international treaty or regime which would address these issues? Can we have a world environmental organization specifically to deal with such issues? Is something which is a very difficult phenomenon. Now, if we come to the status of the displaced, a lot of these peoples often are not recognized. I will give you a very classical example, a problem which is now ongoing. All of us have heard about an island called Bhashanchar. Now, Bhashanchar is an island in Bay of Bengal where a lot of Rohingya refugees from Myanmar are being resettled. All of us might say, oh, that's an easy proposition, not a problem. But if you look at the bigger picture, Bhashanchar is always in the danger of rising sea levels because of global warming. These islands have a big problem, according to the Bangladesh government itself, from rising sea tides and levels. Already thousands of people, the Rohingya refugees, fleeing away persecution from the Rakhine province, resettled in Chittagong, then taken to Bhashanchar. But what will happen to them if tomorrow these islands sink is $1 million question. And as an academician, but most importantly student of international law, these answers lie unanswered. Of course, a lot of you might say that this proposition has not happened. Do we need to redress this issue? My question is, till how long will we run away from these issues? The issue of the Bhashanchar Islands. Closer home, we have people being displaced in the Sundarban Delta in West Bengal, in the Bangladesh region. If you talk about my home state in Orissa, we have thousands of refugees from Bangladesh in government settled camps. If you talk to them, they say that they fled away because of environmental reasons, because of rising sea levels. Of course, no concentrated study as of now has been done in my state, but yes, there are a lot of tales to be told and a lot of unanswered questions. Yes. Now, what is our prima facie need? All of us are aware of the fact that protection of humanity has to be paramount. Yes, I agree to the fact that in 1951 or in the 1960s, the term environmental refugees had not gotten. There are now environmental law legislations trying to seek to find an answer. But let us be reminded of a proposition that we are not talking about a static problem. We are talking about a dynamic problem, and for that we need a dynamic solution. The dynamic solution, which my panelists have also pointed out, is to make it sure that in UN talks and negotiations, environmental refugees are accepted and are termed as a problem. How would you define a problem? How would you talk about it if you do not recognize the issue at hand? This is $1 million question for a lot of national legislations, also for the United Nations, and also for a lot of regional agreements. You talk about the Cartagena Declaration or the OAU statute. A lot of them have a bit more broad definition of the refugees. But it is also time for them perhaps to come out with a static definition or a very concentrated definition of what is an environmental refugee. Of course, from all this, one thing is very clear, that for the time being to come, environmental refugees will be a hot issue. Why? Because of a lot of issues. You talk about Africa, Presently, 14 countries in Sahel and in the sub-Saharan Africa are facing political crisis. A farmer in Chad is worried because of a military coup that might happen in his country. But at the same time, he is also worried that if rains fail this year, how will he be able to sustain? Who will take care of his livestock? And if he decides to move away, maybe to the Lampedusa or to the Greek islands of Santorini, would he be recognized as an environmental refugee or not? There are, of course, a lot of questions. I will not go further into it. I know that the UNHCR and the UN agencies have been trying the best. The international countries have to come to a common consensus and say that no, we have to bell the cat. We have to address the issue. I know that this is difficult, but in this, I'm reminded of the words of the famous poet Robert Frost, who once said, "The woods are lovely, dark and deep, and I have promises to keep, and miles to go before I sleep, and miles to go before I sleep. Let us not sleep and take this situation at hand." Thank you.
Thank you so much for this very, I would say not emotional, but at least passionate, that's the word I was looking for, passionate plea. And that's what we need to make changes in the world, to have passionate persons actually trying to speak for those who do not have a voice. So thank you for that. And yes, as UNHCR, definitely, we are very, very engaged with all those people who are displaced due to climate change and disasters, and it's up to us as a UN that consists of member states and as individual states and on the regional level to see how do we address this. So it's very good that we have this open discussion about that and see how we move forward, because everybody sees the problem. The question is now, how do we address it, right? So thank you all for your contributions. We have 10 minutes left, so I suggest we take 3 questions. We take 3, and then we can see who among us can, among the panel members can actually respond them. So can I give the floor to you all? Yes, please. Just give a minute for the microphone, please.
My name is Shambhu Chopra. I'm an advocate, senior advocate. This is basically a question to address to Ms. Tomoko Fukumura. She talked about inclusive policy pledges and international and domestic treaties, etc., relating to refugees and the ease of pressure, etc. But my question is that, what do you do when the refugees refuse to go back? She talked about various measures to be taken to ease conditions for their return and various measures to be adopted. But what if the refugees refuse to go back? Secondly, the connected aspect is that when the host countries where the refugees are based cannot accommodate them, there is the question of refugees who are living off certain islands of Greece or Italy, and they all want to go to the UK or Germany, and their host countries of origin also don't want them back because of warlike situations or famines or droughts or whatever. So I would like her to throw some light on these aspects. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Second question here.
Right. Hi, my name is Arunava. So I have a question which goes to Professor Chaudhary as well as Professor Sharma. So starting from the case Ionetia, like Titiota, versus New Zealand. So there was the aspect of developmental right also within the case, which was not the prima facie deliberation matter, but it was something of consideration, and it has already been duly discussed that how displacement and development is inherently related. So how does climate-related displacement and a right to development play in this issue, and how, again, Article 1, subclause 2 of UDHR, right? Inalienable right to development is an inalienable right. So can't we see the whole discourse from that aspect also? That is something I felt which came to my mind. And this is to Professor Chaudhary, when he says that we need to have a particular definition, right? So regarding the interpretation of law, like lately there has been a work by International Law Commission on UNCLOS. And I was in ASIL's conference, Professor Dura was also there. There was a question from my side that what happens to interpretations of law over time, like does the original meaning change? So I was given an answer that laws in that way are kind of flexible, and international laws are like special because it gets accustomed to different opinions, and that's why we can stretch the interpretations, right? So when you suggest a very like limited definition, isn't the refugee convention's definition the prima facie example how limited definitions does create harm in future interpretations? So what is your opinion on the interpretation of law vis-a-vis time, how time changes and making it constricted? That is something I felt should be addressed here.
Thank you. You squeezed in 2 questions there. So. I go all the way to the back.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Dr. Tavleen. I have 2 questions. First question is, does UNHCR has any in-house mechanism for the health management of the refugees? If you can briefly enlighten in this regard. Second question is...
Sorry, sorry, we didn't hear. On what? On the?
On this regard. I mean, if you can enlighten. That should be the in-house mechanism for the health management of health management of refugees.
Health management. Okay.
Yes. And the second question is, if a situation happens due to a natural disaster and it causes resulting in the displacement of refugees, or as ma'am said, the cross-border movement of refugees. So in that situation, how does the triage happens for the management of the health of the refugees in that situation?
When they cross the border?
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you.
Let's start with these because we have 3 people and 5 questions. So let's move on that. I will then give first the floor to Tomoko, who can ask, maybe respond to the first and the third person, and then I give the floor to 2 of you for number 2. Is it okay?
No, thank you very much for the very vital, good question. The first question on the return. Sorry. Just to say that the UNHCR actually see traditionally the refugee solution to be key 3. We call it durable solution. One is the local integration. Another one is resettlement, basically to the third country, and the third one is voluntary repatriation. And we know that by our experience dealing with the huge displacement situation, and also the most ideal, I mean, in many cases, the solution could be voluntary repatriation. What we have to be careful here is return to their country of origin if it is safe and that they can actually have the protection of the country that they couldn't have. That was the reason basically they actually initially get displaced. Because they were not able to avail for the protection of their own government, so they needed to seek we call international protection by crossing the border. So that the condition have to be that they are voluntarily going back, but also in the situation that they are able to get the protection from the country of the origin. This is the key. So that but just to say that we actually see this is as the, so that the important part is whether the condition is there. That we actually have to see. And then, I also said the UNHCR do see the voluntary repatriation as most viable option for many of the refugees. But also, we also are very conscious, of course, that some are not, able to go. For that people, that we actually have more the first and the second option should be more, available, which is could be a third country solution, or could be the local integration. Legally, it means the naturalization. It does happen for some of the country that some of the country basically, regularize them as a national. That is not a huge, but it does happen. Just to say also that maybe I also touch base. It's not that the UNHCR just leave the displacement situation as such. For example, when the situation seems the reason of the people that displaced are not there anymore, we actually declare that. For example, the last year, we actually declared we call cessation of the refugee for the Ivorian Coast
refugees. So that, yeah, that basically there was a certain criteria to apply for this accession that they basically set out in the criteria. But basically, what I wanted to say was that that actually come also with the recognition that the reason that they were not able to avail for the protection of their own country is not there. Basically, they are able to seek the protection of their own country, and then to that they will actually facilitate the return. For example, with the large, repatriation program to help them to be able to go back, because sometimes they don't want to, they don't have the resources to go back. So that we actually do this kind of support. So that, just to say that I wanted to highlight that the voluntariness is actually very much important. And then also that if the condition is not there, again, that I just wanted to highlight that is the principle that reform non-reform, which basically the refugee shouldn't be forced back to their country of origin. This is actually, regardless of the, this notion is developed by the advocates. And this is actually regarded as an international customary law. So that regardless of the state, ratifying the refugee convention or not, this should be respected. This is also that all those basic human rights also to see in the the Universal Declaration of the Human Rights or other human rights instrument that you'll be able to find, even though that we don't actually, in some of the country may not ratify the refugee convention. So maybe, yes, health management. That the UNHCR has, we also have the health officer, actually, that in many, in headquarters we have a health section. We actually see that health of the refugee is actually important, the support that the refugee should, receive. And then there's many ways to do it. And one is actually, I also mentioned in our presentation, the inclusion for the national system. That is actually quite an important issue, that the refugees are able to access to the national health services, that they are either primary or the secondary. So that is one way that we actually would like to secure. In-house, that we actually have certain criteria to support the health issue. For example, that if the refugee do need additional, the support. It depends on the operation, if how much money, actually, to be honest, you have. But we actually have certain criteria that we actually support the very critical, refugee to be able to receive further the medical treatment. Another important issue from the health perspective, health issue, is also the mental health issue. Because this is something really largely we actually see from our experience, of course, that those refugees are hugely impacted by the events that they face in their country of origin, or through the course of the move, actually the displacement. And they were extremely impacted. Their mental health, their trauma is heavy, their mental health is heavy. So that this is another area that the mental health have to be looked at. That we don't necessarily have the mental health specialist in our office all the time. We have a mental health specialist at headquarters in the bureau, but we actually get the support from the expert to actually work together with the local expert. Because, for example, in India, you also have an extreme, that the basically pool of the capacity in your own country to support those medical, the mental health. So what we actually do is really to try to facilitate the cooperation with those the experts that are available in the country, that how we be able to, the support that the refugee or asylum seeker who have the mental health issues. I think that also that question I also mentioned about the health issue in the movement. Yeah, this is actually quite a challenging issue, because we don't actually, to be honest with you, UNHCR don't move them. They move by themselves, right? That we don't actually send them by the train or the bus. So there's no way for us to ensure that they can actually come in a good health condition. To be honest, we don't have that way. However, what we try to do is when they cross the border and when they reach the country of asylum, we ask one of the important response for the people who just arrived is the health issue. So that is actually our key priority. It just, I understand the reason why you ask it, but just from the UNHCR point of view, since we are not supporting the people to move, I mean, this is not our job to move the people from one place to another place. So in that sense, we actually have a very much limited, that access to the en route situation. Yeah.
Thanks, Tomoko. That was very clear. I give the floor to Anirudna for the questions on your presentation. Go ahead.
Okay, I'll try to be very brief. See, your definition of development and my definition of development will of course be different. And also country's interpretation of what is development. I'll give a small example here. There is a concept called Pachamama or the Summa Cose in Ecuador. The Ecuadorian constitution recognizes environment as a legal person and has given it certain rights. Does that mean that in Ecuador or any other allied country, development takes a second hand? Maybe no. Back home in India, in 2009, you must be aware of a case which happened in Odisha itself of Vedanta Aluminium Limited when they wanted to acquire an entire hill for mining purposes. This would have put into stake a life of a tribal group called the Dongriya Kont, a very vulnerable tribal group. At that time, Supreme Court stated that at the cost of human lives, development cannot be given precedence, and that is now a protected site. The hill still remains. So whether you see development as building of more malls, pubs, discotheques, or you want a more holistic life, synonymous with sustainable development, is completely a person's individual call. Going with the interpretation of law, of course, law is such a dynamic subject, especially public international law, that it cannot be kept caged and confined. It will have a wide interpretation. But when it comes to international and conventions, my only worry is getting all the countries into a common sphere. And then perhaps, if we try to get in a common regime which talks about climate change and refugees, will the countries be able to ratify and sign it? Will the minimum number of signatories be met so that it legally comes into force? Is another $1 million question. So let us keep our fingers crossed and hope for the best. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for your responses. I'm looking at the time and also considering we start a bit late. So shall we have 2 more persons with questions and then we wrap up? Is that okay? All right. Yes, please go ahead in the pink shirt.
My name is Prabhat. My name is Prabhat Singh. I am assistant professor of law. My question is that there is a resource curse theory. So, resource curse theory. Yes. So, many developed countries use proxy war as to exploit other countries. So, by big corporation. So, if the people of that region displaced externally, so is there any mechanism to hold them liable or to make them share burden in global forum?
Thank you for your question. I'll take one more. All right, go ahead.
Good afternoon. I am Naveen Saju. I am an assistant professor from Kerala. I would like to ask whether this sort of refugee problem can be considered as a humanitarian emergency, because the basic objective of this global refugee or GCR is that it should need to ease the problems faced by the host communities. But it is not clear how the pressure is being eased. For example, I can state that when we look into the ambit of refugee problem regarding the Rohingyas refugee, it is clearly stated by the national daily newspaper Hindu and Indian Express that around 20,000 refugees is being arbitrarily detained by the government. The Indian government is not permitting or not issuing the exit permissions to these Rohingya refugees. That means the government is not at all supporting for any resettlement processes, and the Supreme Court as well as the Union government is stating that they can be considered as a national security threat. Dr. Banerjee also stated that we should need to focus on the educational facilities of children. But the problem here is that those 20,000 refugees who are being arbitrarily detained, the government separated their children from those parents, and the government is not at all trying to reinstate them. So my question is how GCR tries to ease the pressure on host communities, and whether the government is trying to again forcibly move these refugees from the genocidal regime. I repeat, the genocidal regime from which they had fled away. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'll give first the floor to you and then to Moko.
Okay, about the question of resource curse, this has been widely discussed a lot. Now, what do you mean by resource curse? African countries, very rich in natural resources, get independence in 1960s. Since then, there has been a lot of political turmoil. Some of you have pointed out that multinational corporations are behind it, but we also forget that countries are also behind it. Two classical examples, one from the past, Sierra Leone, very rich in diamond resources. Civil wars in 1990s, the UN mission had to step in, the UNAMSIL, the United Mission Assistance Mission in Sierra Leone. It was very clearly found out that multinational corporations were mining diamonds by using child soldiers and refugees. Now many of them were tried by the special court in Sierra Leone. It was an international tribunal. But we need to understand that this is a phenomenon which has been going on for a long period of time. Yes, people have been displaced because of political reasons and environmental law reasons also. This has been more beautifully depicted in a Hollywood movie called Blood Diamond, starring Leonardo DiCaprio. Second to a present conflict now going on in a country called Niger. I hope you know that there was a military coup in Niger, and the new military junta is probably supported by the Wagner group. Now, what is their main aim? What is their main reason of rebellion? That the French, who were the colonial masters, have been looting the natural resources, especially uranium and gold. Correct me if I'm wrong. Now, this has led to a problem where out of every 3 houses, 2 houses in France is lighted because of uranium from Africa and Niger. French companies are becoming richer, but Niger is one of the most underdeveloped countries in the world, has a huge refugee problem. This is also a big reason why 13 to 14 countries in sub-Saharan Africa are presently going through a civil conflict. Most of them hard done by their colonial masters, were going through a phase of new imperialism, and now they are retaliating back. Very interesting times for the international community. Let us keep our fingers crossed. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And then we have Tomoko on her response to the last question, and then we will wrap up. So you can have your lunch. I'm sure you're hungry.
Thank you very much for the very good, important questions. Just to say that the UNESCO has been working with in India that quite some time for decades, and we really have to say that India has been actually having quite a history, decades of the refugee supporting history. I mean, it is actually quite vital. We actually even really want the Indian government to make it more, open about what they do. For the refugee in this country, including the access to the health for certain population. Really, for example, that the Sri Lankan refugee, they really have a good support from the government of India. And then just for the issue of the departure from the country, for example, the resettlement, how the government really helped for the support for the solution. The Indian government has been supporting the solution for many refugees, that there are many, huge number, certain number of the people leaving for the third country solution. It is quite a significant in number, so that it has been going on. But I think, of course, the challenge remains. I think the challenge remains because that in a way, it is that how the solution can be made, how the system can be made. It is really not predictable in this country because we don't have the national refugee framework, no legal framework. If there is the more that the refugee law exists in the country,
that it would be a little, that their support, their solution could be a bit more predictable. This is not now the situation. So that I'm hoping that, while I understanding the context and I understanding the difficulty, but that I think that having this forum with the ISIL, the colleagues, is really the important we have this dialogue, because I think this is us to be able to make even a small step to continue our discussion, to continue to take the issue of the unpredictable refugee, protection framework. So maybe
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, all the panel members. Can I have a big applause for their insightful presentation and also discussion with you. You had very good questions. I can hear you're really interested. That is very good to not only talk to the professors, but also to the students and others to see how we together can have this dialogue. Of course, we have a dialogue in December with multi-stakeholders, with states, with private partners, where climate action is definitely on the agenda, but also other things as durable solution, we talked about resettlement, but also economic inclusion. How can people take care of themselves while they are in a country of asylum? So many topics will be on the agenda for the Global Compact, a Global Refugee Forum, because it's so important that we put our heads together and find solutions, because everybody takes it from its own angle, and that's how we move forward. And of course, what is important in these fora is that also refugees themselves are represented. So they can also raise their voice, which is very important, because here we have us, but actually the ones we are talking about are not there. So that is an important aspect. I would like to thank all of you, and this is not the end of the discussion, it's a continuation. Thank you very much.